We live in a society that celebrates child abuse. From killing them even right before they're born, to teaching them to embrace prostitution and other forms of sexual exploitation, and now even forcing them to get chemically castrated. You know, you'd think this sort of thing wouldn't be all that controversial. But surprisingly, it's been all over the news lately, and people have been fighting to protect this mother's right to chemically castrate her 7-year-old kid. And if it's controversial, I guess I gotta cover it. So speaking of children, I just want to give a shout out to my little baby sister, who just got engaged. She would hate me mentioning this publicly, so I guess it's a good thing she doesn't watch this show. I used to sing Billy Idol to her whenever I drive her anywhere. Hey, little sister shotgun. And the song just fits even more perfectly now. And I think I've totally convinced her to play this song at some point during the wedding. Like maybe when the groomsmen and bridesmen are walking in. Hey, little sister shotgun. It's a nice day for a white wedding. Okay, so the topic for today is transgender kids. I know I've done a couple videos on the issue of transgender theory, but I haven't really talked about how this relates to young kids yet. And like I said, it seems like this kind of stuff has been popping up in the news all over the place lately. So we've got that mom who wants her 7-year-old boy to be chemically castrated. We had a bunch of parents at the LGBT equality town hall who were touting their kids who had already been chemically castrated. And we've got places around the world that are fighting for kids' rights to get sex reassignment surgery even if they don't have consent from either of their parents. And just lots of other crazy stuff like that.
So uncivilized.
I know this is obvious, but the whole idea of it is, if adults can choose their gender, then why can't kids do it too? So you remember the gender unicorn? Here, I'll show it again in case you missed it the first time. Again, this is real material used to teach what gender is. So again, if you look at the top right, there's 3 different spectrums. There's your biological sex, which is what you were born with. Your gender expression, which involves things like how you dress, maybe for a kid, what kind of toys you play with, and that sort of thing. And then there's gender identity, which is what gender you identify as, regardless of your biological sex or your gender expression. So these are supposed to be 3 totally separate spectrums. So in other words, you could be a man who likes culturally feminine things, like cooking or braiding hair or tea parties or whatever girls do nowadays. Or in the reverse, you can be a woman who likes culturally masculine things, like football and video games and playing in the mud and beating each other up.
Play nice with the other kids, unless, of course, one of the other kids want to fight, then you have to kick the other kid's butt.
But I don't want to kick the other kid's butt.
So a quick recap of the issue I mentioned a couple videos ago. If these 3 things are on a different spectrum, it's pretty easy to understand what biological sex is because it's what you're born with, and it's pretty easy to understand what gender expression is because it's how you express yourself. But then that really begs the question, what is gender identity if it's not based on either of those 2 things? So it ultimately begs the question, what is a man and what is a woman? And I still haven't heard any good answer to this question, let alone how somebody figures out what gender they identify as if it has nothing to do with their biological sex or gender expression. But let's just say for the sake of argument that there is some way to kind of feel what your gender identity is and somehow you just know. Let's just say for the sake of argument. So then I guess what they'd be saying is that kids can even do this before puberty, though I guess puberty is a biological thing, so it really should have absolutely nothing to do with puberty in the first place. Right? Well, according to people on the left, kids most certainly can identify as whatever gender they feel like they are. So then, of course, as with any transgender, parents typically push them towards surgery so that the outward expression of their biological sex matches their gender identity. But wait, I thought biological sex and gender identity were 2 totally different things. So why do transgenders need to change their biology if biology is different than gender identity?
That doesn't even make any sense!
Yeah, that really doesn't make any sense. But this is typically a procedure that a lot of transgenders go through so that they look on the outside how they feel on the inside, even though those are supposed to be 2 different things. So keep in mind that sex reassignment surgery involves things like cutting off genitals, cutting off breasts, plastic surgery on the face, lots of hormone blockers and puberty blockers, and literally the same chemical castration that's used for convicted sex offenders. In other words, it's applying surgery and chemical therapy to perfectly functional and healthy biological body parts in order to fit cultural gender norms about what a man or a woman should look like. Again, supposedly biological sex and gender expression and gender identity are supposed to be all different things, but this is kind of the logic of sex reassignment surgery. But the major issue with this surgery and treatment is that it's been scientifically proven to cause permanent damage physically, sexually, and definitely even emotionally. In other words, if somebody's going to go through this process, they really better know what they're doing.
I know what I'm doing.
And how can a kid know what they're doing? At least most places in the world say that a kid can't go through sex reassignment surgery unless they have consent from both their parents, but that's quickly changing. And here's a couple thoughts on that by Liz Wheeler from One American News.
A group of 24,000 psychologists in Australia claim children should be allowed to undergo transgender surgery without the consent of their parents, even if both of the child's parents do not consent. The Australian Psychological Society says, quote, the disapproval of both parents should not inhibit a child under 16 from consenting to procedures, end quote. We're talking about kids younger than 16 years old, and we're talking about surgeries that permanently mutilates the perfectly healthy body of a child. What about the science? The science that says 80 to 90% of children with gender dysphoria outgrow the dysphoria by the time they're adults if they do not transition. Are we now stripping the rights of parents to decide what's best for their kids and instead allowing radical leftist activists to give children the power to decide if they want to go under the knife because they're suffering from a mental disorder?
First off, I just want to say I love One American News and Liz Wheeler, and I would highly recommend them. She's great on topics like this, but I digress. But yeah, culture is becoming so confident that kids can identify as different genders that they're saying that kids' rights to sex assignment surgery should trump parents' rights. So again, let's just assume for a moment that transgenderism is true, and that it really is possible to deep down be some gender that is totally different than what your biological sex is. Even then, with kids being allowed to get sex reassignment surgery without their parents' consent, I've got two major problems with this.
We've got a real, actual problem here.
I'll say.
Okay, first, since when do we allow kids to make major decisions like this without their parents' consent? I wasn't even allowed to have a TV in my room when I was in middle school. It would have been crazy to think I could have gotten surgery on this sort of thing without my parents' consent. And there's lots of other examples of things that kids can't do without their parents' consent. Kids can't get their ears pierced without their parents' consent. They can't go on school trips without their parents signing a form. They can't drive past 10 p.m. in Michigan if they're under 17. They can't drink alcohol under 21. They can't vote. It has been legally determined that kids can't provide sexual consent and therefore in a lot of cases can't legally have sex. Kids can't even get a tattoo or change their legal name without their parents' consent. So what the heck makes it okay for a perfectly healthy child to decide that they want to get their perfectly healthy body parts either cut off or totally reconstructed? Or to say that they can chemically castrate themselves? Even if it were really true that this kid identifies as a different gender and wants to alter his or her biology, don't you think we should at least wait until they're old enough to decide? So that they can make an informed and consensual decision about doing something that's going to have lifelong permanent ramifications? Okay, and secondly, how do we even know that these kids actually identify as different genders? Kids can literally say and think anything. Kids under like 6 or 7 don't even understand the difference between reality and imagination.
Now, reality can be whatever I want.
Like when my younger brother was like 6 or 7, he used to tell us what his life was like when he was a 21-year-old. And I doubt he was lying. He probably really thought those things. Apparently, I'm just picking on all my siblings today. Look, you could put a 7-year-old in a Spider-Man costume and convince him that he really is Spider-Man. I mean, that's exactly what they did with Tom Holland.
You're the Spiderling. Crime-fighting spider. You're Spider-Boy?
Spider-Man.
Not in that onesie, you're not.
It's not a onesie.
Or look, if you take a 7-year-old to an ice cream shop and there's like a million different flavors, that kid could easily pick some flavor of ice cream, try it, and hate it, and then you take them to that same ice cream shop the next day, and they'll be like, look at the pretty ice cream, and they'll pick the same flavor again. Their mother will be like, no honey, you don't like that flavor, we tried that yesterday. No, but mom, I want that flavor, it's so pretty. They don't understand the choices that they're making. Even on something basic like ice cream flavor. If a kid doesn't even know how to pick an ice cream flavor, if they can't tell between what's real and what's not real, if we can't even trust them to get their ears pierced or get a tattoo, why do we think they have the capacity to pick their own gender? Like, look, if you're a parent and your young boy walks up to you and says, Mommy, I'm a girl. Like, I think there's only one question you can ask. What is a man and what is a woman? But really, if your young boy says that he's a girl, honey, what do you mean that you're a girl? Do you know what a girl is? Like, if the entire left in our country can't answer that question, what makes you think that a 7-year-old can answer that question? Almost any boy is going to give a response like, because I want to, because it's fun, because I really like Frozen, because I wanted the girl's toy at McDonald's and not the boy's toy. If you hear a response like this from your young son, I would highly recommend the possibility that your son doesn't know what a boy and what a girl is. And if he doesn't even know what a girl is, how can he identify as a girl? He probably hardly understands the difference biologically, let alone in this whole new gender theory world that we've come up with. Besides, you do know that your gender has nothing to do with what toys you play with and things like that, don't you?
Huh? Do you?
Well, apparently one mom in Texas didn't quite get that memo. So this is a 7-year-old boy named James Younger. He has divorced parents, and the mother claims that he is a girl named Luna and should therefore have sex reassignment surgery, while the father claims that James only claims to be a girl when he's with his mother, and he goes back to acting like a boy when staying with him.
But she can't stay here. This is the men's room.
That is the weirdest thing you have ever said.
James really does claim to be a girl sometimes if you ask him, but the father claims it's only because the mother has been pushing it on him since he was like 3 years old. So basically they took this to court and they've been trying to decide all week if the mother has the right to chemically castrate her son for this reason. So before I say much more, here's Liz Wheeler again from One America News with some comments about it.
After the boy's mother tried to force James to transition to a transgender girl and tried to deprive the boy's father from having any say in James's medical care. And yes, that is child abuse. If you don't think it's child abuse to chemically castrate a sweet, innocent child like this by forcing him to take puberty-blocking medication that is given to convicted sex offenders, then I don't know a more diplomatic way to say this. You're a monster. Even if you deny the scientific evidence that says gender transition is not curative for gender dysphoria, even if you ignore the evidence that shows suicide rates for transgender people remain static even after they have surgery, even if you disregard the studies that show that 85 to 90% of kids who suffer from gender dysphoria grow out of it by the time they're adults if they do not transition, even if you ignore basic biology that shows us men are men and women are women, and according to our DNA and our biology, we are different. Can't you at least wait until this poor, sweet child is old enough to cross the street by himself before you chemically castrate him like Michael Jackson's father did to him? And can't we come together as a country and say, hey, wait a second. This is not tolerance of an LGBTQ lifestyle. This is child abuse for the mother to lock James in a bedroom and tell him monsters only eat little boys, and then withhold affection from her 3-year-old son unless he dresses like a girl.
You know, I find it very strange that it seems like a vast majority of kids who want to be transgender have liberal parents. And why is that? It's almost like what a child believes is directly related to whether or not they get affirmation about it from their parents. So if a boy claims to be a 7-headed Hungarian fairy dragon that breathes fire on Tuesdays and never has to go to school, a parent could very well say, you know what, honey? You're totally right. That's exactly what you are. Good for you. And that kid could easily go throughout his childhood thinking he's a 7-headed Hungarian fairy dragon that breathes fire on Tuesdays and never has to go to school. All you have to do is tell him he's right. Or same thing if a little girl thinks that she's a ferocious Amazonian piranha.
I'm a piranha. Then the Amazon.
But as Liz Wheeler pointed out, 80 to 90% of kids who claim to be a different gender than what their biology is outgrow their gender dysphoria when they get older if they don't go through sex reassignment surgery. And what does this statistic tell us? I think it's simple. Kids believe what they're told. If a boy is told that he's a girl over and over and over again, he's gonna think he's a girl. Kids' minds are so malleable, and like I said, they will believe anything. On the other hand, if parents wait for them to make the decision when they're older, there's an extremely high chance that they'll come to realize that they didn't know what they were saying when they were younger because they were just kids. Look, if he grows up and he still wants the surgery, okay, that's one thing. At least at that point, he understands the lifelong ramifications of what he's getting into, and he's making the decision for himself to mutilate his body so that it matches what he feels like. And the parents aren't forcing it on him when that might not be how he actually feels. And like in the case of James Younger, here are some of the details that have come out. Like Liz Wheeler said, when he was just 3 years old, his mother used to lock him in his room and tell him that there was a monster that only ate little boys, not little girls. The best proof the mother has given us is that he liked Frozen and wanted the girl's toy at McDonald's, which again is supposed to have nothing to do with gender identity. His mother has refused to show him affection unless he claims to be a girl. When James goes back to living with his father, he often goes back to identifying as a boy again and doing boy things. And supposedly James's new name is Luna, but it came out that he really wanted his name to be Starfire. And for those of you who don't know, that's a cartoon character from the show Teen Titans. Great character, by the way, but what this tells us is that all the kid wanted to do was be a superhero. He saw this character on TV and was like, I want to be Starfire. But he doesn't understand that he picked a female character, and that doesn't mean that he identifies as a girl. So do you see what's going on here?
Okay. I see what's happening, yeah.
It's almost like this mother has a political agenda she wants to push. And she doesn't really care what James wants, she's just trying to push that agenda. I mean, it's pretty obvious that she's been conditioning him for this since a young age. She wants him to identify as a girl. So she's manipulating him into believing it's true, and now she wants to chemically castrate him. It's seriously very sad, and it's kind of disgusting. It is ridiculous that people think that this is not child abuse. Look, I totally acknowledge that not every case with transgender kids is this abusive and manipulative, but this is seriously the path we're going down in our country. People on the left are literally fighting for this mother's right to chemically castrate her young boy, even if it's not even what the father wants, because some people have an agenda and so they feel like they have to support the mother. Even if it could be totally proven that he really does identify as a girl, that still should hardly matter. If it's true that he wants to be transgender, let him make that decision for himself. Don't force it on him emotionally. And especially don't force it on him with irreversible damage to his body through sex reassignment surgery. And that's true for any kid that has gender dysphoria. Even though there really are kids who have gender dysphoria and who grow up and still want to be transgender, even the left has to admit that there are so many kids with gender dysphoria who grow out of it. You can maybe argue that an adult has the right to get whatever surgery they want. It's their body, it's their money, they do whatever they want. But to force this on a child is child abuse. They don't understand what they are getting into. No matter what the kid says or what he thinks he wants, he really has no idea what he's getting himself into. So at the very least, wait until he's older. So that's kind of what I have to say about the topic on transgender kids.
And that's all I have to say about that.
I just love that clip. So as always, email me at jakeinaboxpodcast@gmail.com, because for those of you who side with the mother, I want to know why you think that it's okay to chemically castrate kids. And just for people who think that transgender surgery should be legal in general for kids, I really want to know your argument for that, because I have not heard a good argument for why this should be totally legal. But that was this episode of Jake in a Box Podcast. As always, have a good night and stay classy. Hey, hope you liked the show on Jake in a Box Podcast. If you liked this episode, make sure you click the subscribe button below so that you never miss another video of Jake in a Box Podcasts.